Hello, audience members. Welcome to another episode of the Spin Doctors. My name is Ratha. It's my colleague Bruce Merkin, and I don't know if Zoom is recording us vertically or horizontally, actually. All right, Bruce. Today we're talking about how to handle an adversarial media interview.
Indeed, we are, and I trust Zoom is one way or another recording us. Yes.
Yes, I think so.
Hey, Ahmed, isn't you're the technical expert here? I just talk. Uh, so yeah, adversarial interviews, which can be any number of things. It can be interviews with media outlets that may not be friendly to your organization or cause. It can be debate situations, talk radio, podcast, whatever, where you're actually face to face with the opposition. Um, and in any case, you need to be ready. And, folks who've watched our prior episodes know I will keep saying, do your homework, be prepared. And that goes double and triple and quadruple for any situation where you think it's going to be challenging or adversarial. And that means not just knowing your own talking points, but really knowing in some detail the other sides and knowing what's wrong with them. Because remember, if you're right, their talking points have got to have something wrong with them. And you should know what that is and be ready to pounce. Um, the more challenging an interview environment is likely to be, the less you want to be surprised. Um, and I can maybe start off with one example of the sort of thing I'm talking about. Like, you can't always do it perfectly. Obviously, you're improvising on the fly sometimes. But if you really know the other side's talking points and what's wrong with them, you can sometimes do a sort of rhetorical jujitsu in which you actually turn their talking points back on them. And one way I figured out to do this is going back some years when I was at the Marijuana Policy Project. We did a lot of advocacy on behalf of state medical marijuana laws. And I ended up doing a whole lot of talk radio up against usually somebody, either an elected official or somebody from law enforcement, a few times folks from the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy, which this was under the George W. Bush administration, was run by true pitchfork wielding fanatics, um, or what I would call sometimes just paid professional liars. And one of the things they would do, they would always try and sound reasonable. They didn't want to say that they wanted to deprive sick people of something that could help them. So one of their lines was, "We have nothing against medicines derived from plants. That's just fine, even potentially cannabis, but we should do it right. For example, that aspirin is derived from a type of willow bark, but we don't smoke willow bark. We purify it into pills." And that sounds so reasonable. And eventually I realized that the answer to that was, well, if you're saying that medical marijuana should be treated like aspirin and willow bark, we completely agree because we don't put people in jail for possession of willow bark. Bang. They never had a comeback for that. Um, and again, that's not the sort of thing you make up on the fly. Maybe you get lucky and you will, but it's the sort of stuff you have to prepare in advance. You have to know what they're likely to throw at you and be ready for it.
Yeah, that's great. That's great stuff, Bruce. I feel like for to me it's almost the same intensity as what a professional athlete would go through in terms of looking at film study, in terms of just like reviewing and doing your homework and analyzing what your opposition is going to say. Reviewing your opposition, what have they said in the past? What is their style? What are the questions that they have? And then also just, recognizing like when you're at this stage of approaching adversarial media, it should mean that you have done some development of your core messages and being able to have like what is a message you want to communicate. And then Bruce, what you're talking about is like, yes, once we've developed our core messages, but we need to study the opposition and be prepared for those questions because yeah, for those opportunities to do those jujitsu moves and then turn it back, that's that's incredible for the momentum and the effort for whatever campaign that you're working on, and if you can come with that level of preparation. And sometimes, you got to prepare for them, prepare for their rebuttal, and prepare for their, yeah. So prepare for their comment and their rebuttal, and then, and go forward that way.
Right, exactly. But as you said, it's important to say it all starts being really rooted in your core messages, so you can springboard from that to whatever you need to do to respond to them. By the way, I don't know if this is the machines are picking up a lot of ambient noise, but it's raining cats and dogs here,
Mm.
and it's really loud in my ears. I don't know if you're getting it,
I
but
can't hear anything. Yeah.
if our vast public is wondering what that sort of noise is in the background, sorry, I'm in the wettest part of Hawaii, and it sometimes just rains like crazy here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, back to the subject at hand. One thing in in terms of preparation, I do think it's important not to get too cocky. And I've seen, I won't mention any names, but when I was at the Green Lining Institute, one of our staff members got invited on a right wing talk radio show. And he said, "Yeah, I'm ready to go. Let's do it." Um, and looking back, I wish I had pushed him to prepare a little more, and that we had done more practice sessions. Because frankly, this pretty skilled right wing talk show host kind of chewed him up and spit him out. And it was a little bit painful to listen to. And that was a lesson both for him and for me, that you can't go into stuff casually. And that means being willing to assess if you're ready. The old line that there's no such thing as bad publicity isn't always true. If you screw up badly enough, it can hurt you. So there may be times when it's better to either just pass, uh, or pass it along to somebody else on your team who might be a little more experienced. Um, a little humility is always a good idea.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then also, I feel like it, when you're in that type of scenario and situation, there's different reflexes, as I like to call them, that you can practice. And then Bruce, you taught me one of these, and that's like just being able to acknowledge and then redirect into your message. So I always feel like that part of just saying like yes, but here is, let me tell you what the real issue is. I think just being able to practice that and mentally prepare for that. We might have mentioned this in the earlier episode too, but just being able to have those reflexes and prepare them, and then so you can always pivot back to your core message, because it just depends, right? Sometimes you may have the time to do that level of homework. You may be able to, and I absolutely agree. You should go, especially if it's an adversarial one, don't go until you're prepared. Don't go until you're confidently prepared and that you've practiced and you can confidently go through a stress test. And I think that's one of the most beneficial things that you can do is put yourself through a stress test before the event, so that way you can work out all those kinks and stuff. And then Bruce, you're really good at that, to be honest, man. You could put somebody through a stress. You put me through plenty of stress tests, practice situations and scenarios.
And I confess I don't remember your particular training,
It's all
but
good.
I was almost always not as rough on people as I could have been.
Oh man.
Yeah, some folks really, really struggled with that. Um, but practice is also helpful, in any case. And one thing I'll say, one thing that practice gives you is the ability to not lose your cool.
Yeah.
Because in any sort of adversarial situation, they may try to push your buttons,
Hmm.
and you can't let that happen. I have a couple of memories of situations like that might be interesting for folks. One was at the Green Lining Institute. This wasn't me. This was one of our colleagues, who I think you probably remember, Ratha, Stephanie Chen, who
Oh,
was the head of our energy policy team.
love you, Stephanie. Yeah.
But
Stephanie's dope. Stephanie and
yeah,
Ryan.
um, and one time Stephanie was on a radio show in San Francisco opposite a spokesperson for Pacific Gas and Electric. For anybody not from Northern California, Pacific Gas and Electric is the company that everybody loves to hate, and frequently with good reason. Uh, and
There are
one,
electrical, they run our electricity for people who didn't know. And they have they own the infrastructure. And when you hear about wildfires in California and some of them being from electrical lines, that's PG&E. And they have quite the rap sheet, but they also provide electricity. And it's important to support those union workers as well, because yeah, big reason. But
so if anybody from PG&E is watching this, please don't shut off Rotha's power right now.
yeah.
Uh, anyway, somewhere around, I don't know if it was 2012, 2014, they got a statewide ballot proposition on the California ballot that was intended to make it nearly impossible for local governments to set up what are called community choice aggregation, basically locally run, publicly run power systems that would compete with PG&E.
Hmm.
And at Greenlighting, we ended up opposing that initiative. And so Stephanie is on, I think it was KALW in San Francisco, debating a person from PG&E. And it was a lengthy, I think it was an hour long show. And like the first half was the two of them, and then they took listener calls. And what I don't think any of us knew at the time was that this particular show liked to kind of prearrange for provocative calls from local people that they knew.
Mm.
And so they start taking listener calls. And one of the first calls was from a very left leaning San Francisco supervisor named Ross Mercarimi, who was, of course, not buying anything the PG&E person was saying. And the PG&E person just lost it. She went off, said, "This is an ambush. You set me up." And she totally blew her cool. And the thing is, she was probably right in what she was saying. It probably was an ambush, but the way she handled it came across just terrible.
Yeah, it's
She
absolutely
totally lost the thread of the point that she was trying to make and just became this slightly unhinged person ranting about how they were being treated unfairly, when it wasn't necessarily obvious to the listeners that that's what had happened.
right.
Um, you know, you got to learn to stay calm under pressure, and that can be that's hard for me. Um, I've learned to do it, but it does take work and it takes discipline and practice.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's also clear, she probably didn't do her homework either, because you gotta prepare for those, like just like in baseball, you gotta prepare for those pitches, those whatever the curve balls, and you gotta be ready for those. So when they come at you, if you're prepared, you can hit it out of the park. If you're not, you might make a fool out of yourself.
Right. And it doesn't really matter whether it's the host throwing that curveball at you or a caller, a local dignitary, a person from Mars who parachuted in from the spacecraft. It doesn't matter. Stick to your points, refute any baloney that they try and put out, and get back to your message.
Yeah.
Um, so One time, here's another amusing story from my own personal experience. Going back to my marijuana days, I had a really interesting interview once with, of all things, Fox News Radio. I didn't know they had a radio network, but they do, or at least they did. This was probably 2007 or so. And what had happened is, we were constantly sort of combating government disinformation, and particularly their misuse of statistics to scare people, especially scare parents. They would put out things like, teenagers who smoke marijuana are 30% more likely to drop out of school or something. And what they would usually do is say something that was a fact, but they would present it as cause and effect when there was no evidence that it was cause and effect. If kids who smoke pot are more likely to drop out of high school, it could be that kids who aren't doing well in school are more likely to smoke pot. It's not necessarily the weed making them drop out of school. So anyway, we came upon a study from the Netherlands in which the pot smoking high school kids were doing better. They were more likely to be involved in extracurricular activities. They were more likely to go to college. Um, and so we wrote an op-ed about this, and not saying we're endorsing kids smoking weed, but saying, if you're going to be honest about the statistics, how come the government never talks about this? Um, and so I end up being interviewed on Fox News Radio. And this was going to be just a brief news story. It wasn't a talk radio thing. So I was going to be relegated to just a soundbite or two. Um, and before the guy starts the tape rolling, we had a perfectly reasonable sort of pre-conversation, and he clearly got what we were trying to say. And then he turns the tape on, starts rolling, and the first question he asked is, "So why are you telling high school kids that they should pack a joint in with their lunch they bring to school?" I processed that for about 2 seconds, and I simply said, "We're not."
Nice.
And
Nice.
just let his tape keep rolling. And knowing that I had left him with nothing he could use and he was going to have to start over.
Nice. Nice.
And I don't know what finally got on the air. I don't think I ever heard the actual story. But there are times when you have to just not put up with any bullpucky.
Yeah. Yeah. Now that's a curveball that you hit. Oh, you got that one. You came in. Yeah, I mean, as you were talking about that, I was like, man, I wonder what type of weed they were smoking in the Netherlands back then for that type of a performance boost. But also,
I don't know, but clearly the guy had decided he was going to try and piss me off and get me to say something that sounded hysterical, and
yeah,
that would have been the sound bite that they used.
yeah, they were just
And no, I'm sorry, I am not going there.
yeah, yeah. I think they were trying to get you emotionally off tilt,
Yeah.
and
And wasn't, had that happened 5 or 6 years earlier, I probably would have lost.
right, right,
Probably
right.
would have yelled at him. I probably would have given him exactly what he wanted.
Yeah. And that brings me to the point I want to make is like so for people who may be watching this and who might be watching this after their adversarial media, it's like, oh no, I messed up. And I was like, it's okay. We all make mistakes and it's a growth process. I think in one of the early episodes I put out one of my speeches. I wasn't one of my best, but it's about learning from every opportunity. And then those adversarial meetings may actually be the biggest opportunity to learn. But if you have not done that and you're like an executive of a nonprofit and you're thinking about how do you prepare your team, this is probably something where, like working with you, Bruce, or working with myself to be able to do that homework and help prepare people and put them through the stress test. I think that's probably one of the best things to do. So if you can get somebody to do the hostile media interview in a safe place where that video will not go public, but can be used to train you, that's probably one of the best things that you can do. Otherwise, like if you don't have somebody that can play that role for you, or you don't have to work with Bruce or myself, but find people.
Great if you did.
It'd be great if you did, but find somebody who can play that role, who can do that stress test, who's gonna go into that practice session trying to completely beat you up and destroy you. And the harder you make the practice, the more better prepared you'll be for the actual adversarial media interview.
Yeah, no, absolutely. One way or another, practice. If you're not able for whatever reason or another to work with a professional coach, get somebody on your staff and tell them to be a jerk.
Yep. Yep.
Tell them to be, whoever, Tucker Carlson, or whoever you're likely to go up against, and you know, see see what that feels like before you actually do it with an audience of thousands or millions of people.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. And block out the time for it as well. You know, just and I think that's probably one of the hardest things because, Bruce, a lot of the clients that we work with, they're very strapped for time, very stressed for time as well. So, it's always a challenge, which is like it's good to kind of build up your foundation of your core message, have some of these reflexes, like I mentioned earlier, to redirect you back to your core message. So it gets you to a comfort zone. But if you have the chance to prepare and hit these curveballs, just like what Bruce, like what you were talking about, what you just described in your story, man, that will get you so far. Those are big moments that can really help solidify the work that you're doing.
And sometimes that may require also um, not going along with last minute requests. You know,
Yes.
hey, I'm from Fox News. Can you come on our show in 15 minutes? If you're not going to be ready in 15 minutes, don't do it. Say, hey, I'd love to. I'd be better. I've got more time on my calendar tomorrow morning or 3 hours from now or whatever it will take you. But don't be rushed into something that you're not ready for.
Yeah.
And yeah, I want to circle back to one thing we were talking about before, and which was preparation and being able to redirect from whatever you're asked. And I do think that actually for a lot of the stuff we talked about, if anybody didn't see the Kamala Harris Fox News interview with Bret
Right.
Baier, it's worth finding on. I assume you can find it on YouTube or on. I hate to send people to the Fox News website, but that may be where you can find it. Or maybe they want to bury it because she handled it pretty well,
Yeah.
and she wasn't taking any bull from anybody. And he kept interrupting her, and she kept not letting herself be interrupted. But she kept her cool, and it was very skillfully done. I will say sometimes, and you might disagree with this a little bit, Ratha. I don't know, um, but we've all in our line of work spent a lot of time teaching people not to answer the question, and sometimes that doesn't come off well. We may have done our work a little too well. And I've seen a number of times Kamala, but also some other candidates in this cycle, um, blow totally by the question, not even giving a little bit of an answer. And particularly if it's in an extended interview or something like a town hall on CNN or whatever, that can look bad. It can make you look shifty and evasive.
Yep.
And if there is a way to quickly address the issue, hopefully in a way that doesn't damage you, and then pivot to the points you were trying to make, it will come off better.
Yes.
It's tricky to do and it takes practice. But again, practice makes perfect.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. I think that was in our first episode where we talked about how when we were reviewing both debates from Kamala and Donald, how they didn't answer the question and it just kind of redirected right back to their
Yeah.
message, which is, to a degree, like what we teach, clients as well and how you handle media. But I think what you do want to do is that you only want to use that if you're caught off guard. Like, it's like one of those. base level layers. But what you really want to be able to do is do your homework, prepare for those questions, and be able to answer those questions and then pivot to your main message. You always want to end back to your main message, back to your stories that you want to that your sticky stories that you want to leave people with. But in this case, I think for this episode, what we want to talk about is like how do you handle those, half second moments
Yeah.
that can really trip you up and, change the whole interview.
And one little thing to always remember, this may be getting a bit granular, but probably worth mentioning, is if you're asked a question with a bogus premise, don't repeat the bogus premise.
Mm.
If you're asked, so there are reports all over the internet that you murdered your first wife. Did you?
Oh my goodness.
You don't say, well, I know people are saying I murdered my first wife, but really, just don't repeat the lie.
Yeah, just go straight to that no. Probably just like a hysterically laughing, can't believe that was even said. Like, all right, Bruce, let's wrap it up. Let's see here. So sounds like, homework preparation can't be more important, but also making sure you have your core message, being able to redirect back to your own message, but being able to, do some study and study your opponent, especially if you have the time. Don't rush yourself. Don't get yourself into situations that will set you back more. Like what you don't want to happen is you get into a bad interview, do a bad interview, and then you're trying to spend like 5, 6, 7 good interviews just to make up for that one bad interview. So that's awful. So, take your time, do your homework, get prepared, get your stress test done, and then when you feel comfortable, go ahead and take on those adversarial media interviews or put that clearance on your staff. Like this staff has gone through enough training. We can trust this person to take that on and stuff.
Exactly. Be prepared. Don't get surprised, and learn to keep your cool even under pressure.
Yeah, awesome. All right, well, thank you all so much, and hopefully this has been helpful. And stay tuned for future episodes.
All right. We'll see you.